Crimson Inquiry.
Says he's been playing in a little orchestra at some hall in Holborn. Never brings home much for it, poor lad. And last night? Holmes asked casually. He was also out? That he was. When about 7, came and let me see, near midnight I'd say. I was banking the fire. He'd had a drop, nothing untidy, mind you, but I could smell the drink on him. I told him he'd catch his death in the night air. He laughed and said there were worse things than a chill to be caught in London. And that's God's truth, sir. Holmes inclined his head. You are a most observant landlady, Mrs. Hargreaves. If anyone doubts that select gentlemen live here, he need only consult your memory. She flushed with pleasure. Well, Mr. Crane's a good lodger. I'd be sorry to see harm come his way. Let us hope no such sorrow awaits you, Holmes said quietly. Now if you will allow us. He led the way up the narrow, threadbare carpeted stairs, whose every step protested underfoot. The sound of violin practice grew louder, resolving into a halting study in double stopping. At the second floor, Holmes paused before a door from which the music clearly emanated. He rapped twice with his knuckles. The playing broke off mid-bar. There was a brief scrape of chair legs, then the door opened a little way, revealing a pale, thin face framed by dark hair, worn rather longer than fashion dictated. The eyes that regarded them were deep-set and intense, with the peculiar feverish brightness that Watson had often seen in men of nervous temperament. Yes? The young man said. His voice carried a trace of hoarseness, as of someone unused to speaking above orchestral noise. Mr. Elliot Crane? Holmes said, I am he. My name is Sherlock Holmes. This is my friend, Dr. Watson. We should be obliged if you would grant us a few minutes of your time. The effect of the name was instantaneous. A faint color rose in Crane's cheeks. The hand holding the door tightened upon the edge. Sherlock Holmes, he repeated. The detective. That term has been applied to me, Holmes admitted. Crane hesitated, then opened the door wider. You had better come in then. Though I warn you, there is little here to interest your famous eye. The room was indeed meager, a narrow bed, a scarred chest of drawers, a small table by the window, and a single armchair whose stuffing showed through at one arm. A few books and loose music sheets were stacked precariously on every available surface. The violin lay upon the bed, its case open beside it. A mute of black rubber still clung to the bridge. Holmes' gaze took in these details, and more in a single sweep. Watson noted how his eyes lingered for a fraction of a second upon the instrument, upon the cake of rosin on the table, and upon a folded cloak hanging by the door, upon whose lapel a faint smear of reddish wax could be discerned even without a lens. Crane motioned them to the chair and perched himself on the edge of the bed, his back against the wall. I suppose this concerns my visit to Mr. Thorne, he said without preamble. Mrs. Bramwell told me the police had been. She also told me he is dead. You take us a step forward, Mr. Crane, Holmes remarked. The Yard has not yet been so obliging as to arrange a meeting between us. You are quite right. My interest in you arises from your relation to Marcus Thorne, past and present. Crane's mouth twisted. Past and present both lie in his grave now. Not entirely, Holmes said. There are also certain manuscripts, and a history in Prague, and a foreign gentleman who signs himself S. Shall we begin there? If Crane had shown surprise at Holmes' name, it was nothing to the shock that now crossed his features. The blood drained from his face. He half rose, then sank back down. You know of Serapion? He whispered. Holmes steepled his fingers. You confirm, then, that Serapion and S are one and the same. Crane gave a short, mirthless laugh. No one else coils serpents round liars in sealing wax. Where did you see that devil's mark? On a letter to Thorne? I have before me such a letter, Holmes said. Dated from yesterday, appointing an interview this very evening. Crane shut his eyes briefly. Then the wheel has come full circle, he murmured. I knew it would, sooner or later. Serapion never relinquishes a grudge or a claim. You have had dealings with him yourself, Holmes prompted. Dealings? Crane opened his eyes again, and there was a glitter in them that Watson did not wholly like. If you call it dealings when a spider invites a fly into his parlor, very well. I was the fly. Thorne was the second. In Prague, Holmes said. In Prague, Crane confirmed bitterly. I had a scholarship at the Conservatoire. Thorne came as visiting master, already a name in London, but not so great as to disdain a continental season. Serapion moved in the shadows behind the impresarios, fixing engagements, arranging introductions, procuring anything for a price. He fancied himself a patron of the new school. He saw something in me, or so he said. Thorne saw something else. A composition? Holmes suggested. A piece of music born in that winter. Yes, Crane's hands clenched upon his knees. I had written a study, no more than a study, though I did not realize it then. A sort of fantasia on a Moravian folk theme. Thorne took an interest. He guided, corrected, suggested. He said my raw material had promise but lacked structure. I was young. I believed him. I let him reshape it, add a bar here, alter a modulation there. When it was done, it no longer felt wholly mine, nor his. It had become something between us. And then? Holmes asked. Then, Crane said flatly, it was performed. In Prague, then later in Vienna. Under his name only. He called it Winter Nocturne. Critics hailed it as his most original work in years. My name did not appear upon the program, nor upon the published score when it followed. I protested. He said that my contribution had been that of a pupil only, that he had done the true work of creation. Serapion, seeing a quarrel with profit in it, came to me with offers. He would make my case known in the press, he said. He would expose Thorne and ensure that the world knew the true source of the nocturne. All, of course, for a percentage of the receipts. You declined, Holmes said, with quiet certainty. I declined, Crane echoed. Not because I wished to spare Thorne, God knows. I did not, but because something in Serapion's smile made me colder than Thorne's theft. I told him I would not build my career upon a scandal, that if I were to be remembered, it must be for work that was wholly mine. Thorne and I quarreled. He refused to acknowledge me. The Conservatoire took his part. The scholarship disappeared. So did I. Serapion washed his hands of me, as far as I knew. Until now. He stared dazedly at the worn carpet. Holmes' voice was soft, but there was steel within it. You visited Thorne 3 days ago. You spoke of injustice, of blackmail, of promises broken. You warned him there were others less scrupulous than yourself. Crane's head came up sharply. Mrs. Bramwell has a sharper ear than I thought. She has a sharper honesty than some, Holmes replied. Tell us of that interview, if you please. It was simple enough, Crane said. I had heard rumors that Winter Nocturne was to be resurrected in London. I had also heard that Thorne had taken on a new protégée, a blind girl of remarkable talent. It was said he was writing a concerto for her. I could not bear it, Holmes. To think that he should again clothe himself in borrowed splendor while I scraped for coppers in lodging houses. I went to him. I demanded that he acknowledge me privately, if not publicly. That he should at least arrange for me to have work, pupils, something, and he refused. As he always had. He spoke of contracts and reputations. He accused me of ingratitude. He broke off, then went on more quietly. I told him Serapion would not be so gentle. That if he would not make amends for the past, some other hand might force him. It was anger speaking more than intention. I left him then. I have not seen him since. Watson watched Holmes narrowly. He knew his friend too well not to perceive the almost imperceptible relaxation of certain muscles about the eyes and mouth, which signified that some inward tension had eased. Where were you last night? Between 9 and midnight, Mr. Crane? Holmes asked, in a tone so casual that only one who knew him could have recognized the importance of the question. Crane's answer came without hesitation. Playing second fiddle in a wretched little band at the Alhambra Music Room in Holborn. I was there from 8 until 11. We had 6 numbers, with barely time to breathe between them. You may ask the proprietor, the leader, any of the girls who sang. And after 11? I went with 2 of the others to a public house nearby. We drank more than was sensible. I recall leaving sometime near 11:30 and walking home. I reached here shortly before midnight. Mrs. Hargreaves can confirm my arrival. As for the hours between, London streets can speak for themselves. Holmes nodded slowly. Your violin, Mr. Crane, may I? Crane gestured permission. Holmes lifted the instrument with the familiarity of one who knows its weight. He turned it over, examined its back, its worn edges, the repaired crack along one rib. He plucked a string, sniffed the faint odor of resin, and glanced at the mute still affixed. You practice with the mute often, he observed. I must, Crane said with a touch of bitterness. The walls here are thin, and the neighbors less appreciative than Mrs. Hargreaves. Without it, they pound upon the ceiling. Holmes' eyes flicked to Watson for a heartbeat. The doctor's mind leapt at once to Cordelia Ashworth's description of the thin, constrained tone that had troubled her sleep. He replaced the instrument with care. One last question. Mr. Crane, do you know the present London address of Serapion? Crane laughed again, more harshly. Serapion does not lodge where a man such as I may call. He moves between hotels and the private houses of those who find him useful. The last I heard, he had rooms near the Strand. But I will tell you this, Mr. Holmes, if he has sunk his teeth into Marcus Thorne, he will not loose them easily. Dead or alive, Thorne will pay. Holmes regarded him for a long moment. It is conceivable, he said at last, that the debt has already been collected by another hand than Serapion's. Thank you for your candor. Mr. Crane, you have darkened the picture, but you have also supplied colors that were lacking. We shall not intrude further upon your practice. He rose. At the door, he turned back. If you should receive any communication bearing that serpent seal, he added, I advise you to consider carefully before consigning it to the fire. Flames do not always destroy the danger one imagines. Crane's mouth twisted into something not quite a smile. I have learned that lesson already. Mr. Holmes, I do not think the fire is finished with me yet. Out in the fog once more. Watson fell into step beside his friend. Well? He said quietly. Do you believe him? I believe, Holmes replied, that Elliot Crane has told us the truth as far as it suits him. Which for the present is far enough. He is a bitter man, not a subtle one. Poison is the weapon of those who prefer shadows. You absolve him then? I absolve no one, Holmes said. But I move him, for the moment, from the foreground to the middle distance. There is another figure whose outline is becoming more distinct. You mean Serapion. I mean Serapion, and perhaps one more, whose face has not yet turned fully toward us. Come, Watson. We must return to Baker Street. I have a telegram to send to the Strand and some very careful listening to do regarding a certain phantom violin. We returned to Baker Street by slow degrees, the cab being obliged to pick its way through a city half blinded by fog. When at last we climbed the familiar 17 steps, Holmes went at once to his writing desk and seized pen and paper with the air of a man whose mind has outrun his surroundings. 2 brief notes flew from his pen in rapid succession. The first, he said, folding it, to our gossamer friend, Langdale Pike. If anyone in London society or its demi-monde has heard the name Serapion of late, he will have done so. He addressed and sealed it with scarcely a pause. The second to the managers of 3 Strand hotels where a certain type of foreign parasite is apt to attach itself. I inquire for guests of that name or bearing our serpent lyre upon their correspondence. He rang for Mrs. Hudson and entrusted the letters to a boy with instructions for immediate delivery. Then, instead of throwing himself upon the settee, as I had half expected, he crossed to the corner where his own violin stood in its case. You recall, Watson, he said, opening it, Miss Ashworth's description of the sounds which disturbed her at some indeterminate hour of the night. Indeed, she spoke of a thinner, constrained tone, unlike Thorne's usual warmth. Precisely, and she located it as if from above and behind her room, that is, in the direction of the music room. You will also recall, however, that the Stradivarius we saw there bore clear evidences of neglect. You concluded it had not been played in days. At least a week, he corrected. Dust, Watson, is the most honest witness in London. He tightened the bow hair with a few deft turns and screwed a small mute upon the bridge. Indulge me in a small experiment. Kindly station yourself in our bedroom yonder, with the door ajar. I shall play here first with mute, then without. You will describe, as exactly as you can, the difference. I obeyed, somewhat puzzled as to his intention, but long since resigned to the role of experimental subject. From the inner room, with the intervening doorway framing my view of the sitting room in diminishing perspective, I heard him draw the bow, muted. The violin's tone reached me as a dull, nasal thread of sound, its harmonics flattened, its former brilliance caged. When, after a pause, he removed the mute and played the same short passage, the difference was striking. The note was fuller, its overtones rich, its resonance easily filling both rooms. Well? Came his voice. I returned and reported my impressions. Miss Ashworth spoke of a thinner tone, as if constrained, I concluded. What I have just heard with the mute accords well with her description. Just so. He laid the instrument aside once more. Add to that the circumstance that we found a mute affixed to Crane's violin, and we begin to perceive how such a sound might be produced within the Thorne household without recourse to the Stradivarius. You suspect there is another instrument there? I am sure of it, he said curtly. Cordelia Ashworth did not practice solely upon her master's treasure. No man who knows the value of such an instrument would permit it. There's a pupil's violin somewhere in that house, Watson, and someone played it last night. Miss Ashworth herself? I ventured. You heard her testimony. She was in the grip of a heavy sleep, punctuated by brief, confused wakings. A blind woman's ear is extraordinarily sensitive. She would know by the mere placing of her hands whether the instrument lay by her bed or admired in its stand. No, the phantom player was in another room. He flung himself into his armchair and for a space sat quite motionless, his eyes half closed, his long fingers drumming lightly upon the arms. I knew better than to disturb him. The fog pressed against the window panes like some tangible thing. From the street came the muffled cries of vendors and the rattle of a distant hansom. Dimmed by the heavy air. Presently, he sprang up again with renewed energy. It is time, he said, to review our little drama as if it were, in truth, a musical score. We have our principal themes: Thorne's guilt over the winter nocturne, Crane's resentment, Serapian's cold demands, Miss Ashworth's devotion, Miss Graves' sharp intelligence. The night of the 11th, Thorne, under threat, alone in his music room. Tea brought at 10. Poison acting within the hour. A letter burned and its ashes later removed. A second teacup filled and emptied. A bruise upon the victim's wrist. Phantom music heard by a blind girl. And in the morning, a note apparently written by a dying hand, pointing to a mysterious she. He paced as he enumerated each point, like a lecturer beating time. There is harmony and there is dissonance, he continued. Certain facts support one another. Others clash. The doctor's estimate of time of death jars against Lestrade's convenient early morning window. The state of the Stradivarius jars against the testimony of late-night playing. The blackmailer's interest in keeping his victim alive clashes with the finality of murder. And above all, the calm, even script of Thorne's supposed farewell jars against what we know of belladonna's effects upon the brain. You mean he would not have been in a state to write coherently? I asked. Would you, with your heart pounding at thrice its normal rate, your vision distorted, your thoughts racing in delirious fragments? No, Watson. A single scrawled word, perhaps. Not a neat, sardonic sentence. I tell you, that note is as out of place upon that desk as a Mozart minuet at a prize fight. But the handwriting, imitated or compelled, he cut in. We have seen it done before, the Norwood builder, if your memory needs jogging. An unsteady hand guided over the paper, Letters traced beforehand in pencil and overwritten in ink. There are a dozen methods. If Lestrade had but had the wit to bring me the original at once, instead of a copy, I might already have demonstrated some of them. He broke off as a sharp tap came at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered. A telegram upon her salver. "For you, Mr. Holmes. The boy says it came from the yard." Holmes tore it open. His eye traveled swiftly down the few lines, and his jaw set. The orchestra takes on a new instrument." He tossed the form to me. It ran from Lestrade. "New evidence. Chemist near Thorn House identifies blind lady's companion as woman who yesterday purchased large quantity of belladonna tincture. Motive for pupil also emerged. Thorn's solicitor confirms new will leaving her substantial share of estate. Intend to arrest both women tonight unless you show cause. Lestrade." "So the net tightens where it should not," Holmes said coldly. "Miss Graves buying belladonna. That, at least, is interesting. You see some alternative interpretation?" I asked, for the news, I confess, had staggered me. "I see that a woman entrusted with the care of a blind lady might very well purchase such a drug for wholly innocent reasons," he replied. "Laudanum and its cousins are the daily tools of those who manage nervous conditions. But our good Lestrade, having sniffed poison, now imagines it in every bottle." He strode back and forth in growing agitation. "Nevertheless, this alters the tempo. Lestrade will not be stayed long by refinements. He has his chemist, his new will, his obliging note, and his belladonna bottle. For a man of his caliber, that constitutes a symphony. You must go to him at once," I urged. "Surely he will heed you." "He will heed me only so far as I present him with something more substantial than my opinion," Holmes answered bitterly. "He is not altogether unreasonable. He has, in his plotting fashion, accumulated a formidable heap of circumstantial evidence. What do I offer in return? A burned letter whose ashes are missing. A phantom violin. A bruise that might mean much or nothing. And a foreign scoundrel whose very existence he may doubt." He stopped abruptly, his eyes burning. "No, Watson. I must do what I have done before. Run ahead of the yard by a full length and bring down the true quarry, while they are still scenting along a false line. If Lestrade would hang two women for want of a better neck, I must provide him with that better neck, and quickly." "How?" I demanded. He stood for a moment quite still. Then his features hardened into the expression of almost fierce resolve that I had seen when he faced our most dangerous adversaries. "By forcing the unseen hand to show itself," he said. "By playing upon the strings of fear and greed as skillfully as Thorn ever played upon gut and catgut. If Serapion is in London, and I would wager a very considerable sum that he is, he will not yet have abandoned his designs upon that manuscript. Thorn's death has complicated them. It has not extinguished them." "You mean to use the manuscript as bait?" "Precisely. Somebody believes that the Winter Nocturne, or some other score connected with that Prague winter, is hidden in Thorn's house. They have already searched in one fashion, hence the missing ashes. They may search again more boldly if they are led to believe that the prize is still within their grasp. And that time is against them." He snatched up Serapion's letter from the table and tapped it with a forefinger. "This, Watson, provides us with the stratagem. Thorn did not live to keep the appointment at 10 o'clock tonight. But what if Serapion were to receive word that another will attend in his place with the manuscript in hand? You would write in Thorn's name?" I exclaimed. "In Miss Graves' hand, more likely," he said, with a sudden wolfish smile. "Or in another which he will recognize as sufficiently authentic. We must contrive to reach him before Lestrade reaches our ladies. If I can draw him or his agent into the open, within reach of my own eyes and, if necessary, my revolver, then we shall see where the true danger lies." He was interrupted by another knock. This time more urgent. Mrs. Hudson reappeared. her usually placid face disturbed. "A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes. He would give no name, but he says it is a matter of the greatest and most immediate importance." I told him you were engaged, but well, sir, he would have pushed past me if I'd not stepped in front. Holmes threw me a quick glance. "Our music draws its own audience, Watson. Show him in, Mrs. Hudson." A moment later, a tall, spare man in an ulster and soft felt hat entered. The collar of his coat was raised, half concealing his features, but as he pushed it down, I saw a face of singular pallor, with a thin, well-cut nose and eyes of a chilly, washed-out blue. The mouth was framed by a short, pointed beard, shot with gray. Upon his right hand, as he removed his glove, there gleamed a gold ring set with an intaglio of a serpent coiled about a lyre. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" he said, in a voice whose faint foreign accent I could not at first place. "Permit me to introduce myself. I am called Serapion." Holmes inclined his head the merest fraction. "You spare us an errand to the Strand," he said. "Pray, be seated, Mr. Serapion, if that is the name you are using in London." The newcomer allowed himself a thin smile and took the chair Holmes indicated, crossing one long leg over the other with languid precision. "It serves as well as any other," he replied. "Names, Mr. Holmes, are but labels attached to functions. Mine has attached itself to certain functions in the musical world. I gather that it has now attached itself, somewhat inconveniently, to the death of Marcus Thorne." His pale eyes flickered toward me and back again, weighing, assessing. The accent, now that I heard more of it, had a Central European quality, neither wholly German nor wholly Slavic, but somewhere between. "You do not appear surprised by that death," Holmes observed. "I am merely prompt in reading the evening papers," Serapion returned coolly. "A celebrated musician found dead under suspicious circumstances. Such a thing spreads quickly, even through fog. When, in addition, I learn that the incomparable Sherlock Holmes has been seen entering and leaving the house in question, I draw certain inferences. You inferred that my presence might intersect uncomfortably with your correspondence," Holmes said, his gray eyes now very keen. "A reasonable deduction." Serapion's fingers toyed idly with the serpent ring. "I will be frank, Mr. Holmes. It is my habit. Men of our respective trades waste little by dissembling with one another. I have had business with Thorne, business of a nature which, were it misunderstood, might lead unimaginative minds to speak of blackmail. You repudiate the term?" "I say only that it is imprecise," he answered, seemingly unmoved. "Thorne owed a debt of honor. I offer him a means of discharging it and of preventing an old scandal from erupting anew in a less tolerant age. In return, I sought legal recognition of rights which, in strict justice, were not his to keep. An exchange of securities, if you like. When I learned that he had died before the arrangement could be consummated, I foresaw that an investigator of your subtlety might very well stumble upon my letters, and lacking the full score, misinterpret the melody." Holmes' hand moved almost imperceptibly toward his pocketbook. "You take it for granted, then, that I have seen at least one of those letters?" Serapion's smile deepened by a hair's breadth. "If you had not, you would not know my name," he said, "nor that I favor the emblem of Orpheus' instrument entwined by wisdom and danger. The newspapers are as yet mercifully ignorant of such details." Holmes drew out the cream envelope and laid it upon the table. "Seal upward. Your hand, I think." Serapion leaned forward, examining the serpent and lyre with professional appreciation. "Undeniably. Though I trust you will not accuse me, on the strength of that wax, of having throttled the life from your English virtuoso." "I do not often make accusations upon the strength of wax alone," Holmes replied. "But I do observe where wax has been and where it has not. You wrote twice to Thorne." "More often than that over the years," Serapion corrected. "Though recently, yes, twice only, the last in this city." Your landlady, Mrs. Bramwell, saw one. You have the other. The first he burned, Holmes said. The second you expected him to answer with obedience. I expected him to keep an appointment, Serapion said evenly. This very night, in fact, at 10 o'clock. My rooms, not far from the Strand. Instead, I receive no word, and the man is found dead in his study, apparently some hours earlier. Does it not occur to you, Mr. Holmes, that his death is as inconvenient to me as it is to him? Holmes regarded him over steepled fingers. It occurs to me that your interest in him was not philanthropic, he said. You wish to obtain from him a manuscript, the so-called Winter Nocturne, and to compel him to renounce its performance under his name. Why now, after all these years? Because, my dear sir, he had at last something to lose, Serapion replied. While he sulked in artistic seclusion, with no fresh work coming from his pen, there was little leverage to be applied. But when word reached me that he would revive the Prague composition, and that a new concerto was to be unveiled in London under his name, I judged the moment ripe. His star was poised to ascend again. It would have been unfortunate for him had certain old clouds darkened that rising, and lucrative for you had you harnessed the storm, Holmes said. You put it crudely. Serapion shrugged, but not inaccurately. I am a facilitator. I arrange for art and money to find one another, and I take a commission for smoothing their union. Thorne, in his youth, took more than his share of glory from a collaboration. I sought, in his maturity, to redistribute that glory and its accompanying profit more equitably. Elliot Crane among the beneficiaries. Holmes remarked. A flicker of amusement passed through Serapion's eyes. Poor Crane, a talented boy, but moral in the most inconvenient ways. I recall that he turned up his nose at my offers in Prague. I do not suppose he has grown less scrupulous with age. He has grown considerably more embittered, Holmes said. He also has an alibi which, for the present, removes him from the circle immediately about Thorne at the hour of his death. Serapion spread his hands. Then let us agree that, whatever my sins in connection with Thorne's oeuvre, his physical demise does not lie at my door. You ask me, in effect, Holmes said slowly, to clear you of the shadow of murder. I ask you, Serapion corrected, to recognize that our interests may, for the moment, coincide. You wish to discover who killed him. I wish to recover what he stole, if, as I fear, he has not already hidden or destroyed it. The police, your Lestrade, are already braying after a blind girl and her companion. If they hang or imprison those women, the matter will be closed in the public mind. No further search for manuscripts. No further inquiry into Thorne's past. My cause is lost. And therefore, Holmes said quietly, you would have me prevent Lestrade from satisfying his crude sense of justice, in order that you may continue your more refined pursuit of gain. If you like, Serapion said, undisturbed. I do not resent your phrasing. I merely state that, while you chase truth and I chase property, we run, for a little while, upon the same road. I have information. You have methods. Shall we exchange, as men of the world? Holmes did not answer at once. His gaze had grown distant, but I could see by the slight tightening at the corners of his mouth that he was measuring every word, every gesture of the man opposite. You have been in Thorne's house, he said suddenly. It was not a question. For a brief interview some days ago, Serapion admitted coolly. He wished at first to reject my terms out of hand. I persuaded him that resistance would not serve. I will not pretend it was a pleasant conversation. He was proud. I was firm. But we parted with an understanding. He would consider my demands. I would give him 48 hours. My second letter set forth the precise conditions of our next meeting. I have not been under his roof since. You are sure of your memory upon that point? Holmes' voice had taken on a silkiness which I, who knew him, recognized as the precursor to some very direct thrust. Serapian's pale brows arched a trifle. "I am not in the habit of forgetting my movements," he said, "particularly where they intersect with those of valuable clients. Then you will have no objection to my inquiring at your hotel regarding your own whereabouts last night between 10 and midnight." A faint hardness crept into the other's tone. "Ask whom you please. I dined at 7 in the company of a musical critic whose name you would recognize, then attended, with him and others, the latter part of a concert at St. James's Hall, after which I returned to my rooms to await Thorne. He did not come. I retired somewhat after midnight. The hall porter can confirm." Holmes inclined his head. "You understand that I shall verify all this." "I should be disappointed if you did not," Serapian said. There was a brief silence. Holmes broke it. "You spoke of information," he said. "Beyond what you have already given, your business with Thorne, your movements, what else do you bring?" Serapian's gaze sharpened. "I bring you this," he said. Thorne had, in that house, not one but two pupils. The blind girl was his showpiece, his charity. The other was his experiment. A mind, Mr. Holmes, can be trained as rigorously as a hand. He liked to play them against one another. In his mind, at least, the one all ear and instinct, the other eye and calculation. You refer to Miss Graves. To Helena Graves, yes. She is no mere companion. She is a musician of sorts herself, not in performance, but in intellect. She copied for him, critiqued, even suggested. In Prague days, such women were called composing wives, though the title was half a sneer. Thorne, I think, trusted Miss Graves with his thoughts more than he did the girl with his heart. You suggest she knew of the Winter Nocturne? Holmes said. I suggest, Serapian returned, that she knew more than was good for Thorne, or perhaps for herself. A woman such as that, devoted yet proud, learns of a past betrayal. It can have unpredictable effects. I read it in his manner when he spoke of her. Yet you yourself threatened to expose that betrayal, Holmes remarked. You cannot be surprised if others besides you tugged at that knot. I do not pretend to map every passion in another man's household, Serapian said. I say only that if a hand there reached for poison, it is more likely to have been guided by knowledge than by blindness. It was a skillful move, and I saw Holmes mark it. Serapian was, in his polished way, adding weight to the very suspicion Lestrade already harbored. While appearing merely to present character portraits, Holmes rose abruptly and crossed to the window. Outside, the fog pressed close, a yellow wall. For some moments he did not speak. When he turned back, his expression was unreadable. Mr. Serapian, he said, you have been candid after your fashion. In return, I shall be equally frank. The case as it stands points to minds less cautious than mine, toward Miss Ashworth and Miss Graves. There is poison purchased, there is a new will, there is a cryptic note. Lestrade is sharpening his handcuffs as we speak. Then you must blunt them, Serapian said simply. For both our sakes. Holmes' eyes glittered. It so happens, he said slowly, that I had already formed the intention of intervening. Not, I confess, out of concern for your financial prospects, but because there are dissonances in this composition which I cannot endure. A false resolution would offend my professional ear. Then we understand one another, Serapian said, rising. You pursue your harmony. I pursue my manuscript. If, in the process, a blind girl and a clever woman escape an ugly fate, we may both sleep better if we sleep at all. He moved toward the door, then paused and turned back. A word of warning, Mr. Holmes, if you will permit. Thorne was not the only man in that house capable of deceit. Your Miss Graves has a sharper mind than most of your police. Do not underestimate the lengths to which a woman will go to protect that which she loves. His pale eyes rested on my friend a heartbeat longer. Then he bowed and left as abruptly as he had entered. The soft click of the door swallowing his departing footsteps. For some moments after his exit, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the mantelpiece clock. Holmes remained standing, his gaze fixed upon the closed door, as if through it he could still see the retreating figure. "A curious ally," I ventured at last. "An ally?" Holmes gave a short, mirthless laugh. "No, Watson. Serapion is not an ally. He is a second player attempting to improvise upon a theme already set. We shall hear more of his variations before the end. You believe him innocent of the actual murder?" "Innocent is a word which sits uneasily upon such shoulders," Holmes said. "But I believe that his hands did not pour the belladonna. His trait is leverage, not lethal finality. He prefers his victims alive and obliging. He paced once, twice, then stopped so suddenly that I almost collided with him. His visit, however, is invaluable. It confirms that the storm over Thorn's past is darkening. It tells us that Helena Graves is far more than a mere reader of letters. And it warns us that if we do not move swiftly, Lestrade will fasten upon the most obvious scapegoats while the true conductor of this macabre symphony slips quietly from the orchestra pit." He seized his hat and coat. "Where now?" I asked, reaching for my own. "To Hampstead," he replied. "Before Lestrade. We must see Miss Graves and Miss Ashworth at once. For if Serapion is correct about one thing, and he usually is where human motive is concerned, it is that Helena Graves will not sit idle while danger marches toward her door. The next move upon this board, Watson, will be hers or mine. I have no intention of allowing her the first stroke." The cab bore us swiftly once more toward Hampstead, the horse urged on by a promise of double fare. Holmes sat bolt upright, his long fingers restless upon his knee. Even in the dim interior, I could see the tension etched in his lean features. "You accept, then," I said, "Serapion's word as to his non-participation in the actual murder?" "I accept nothing," Holmes replied. "I merely assign each actor his most probable part. Serapion is a conductor of plots, not the hand that holds the cup. His visit to us was not prompted by conscience, but by calculation. He fears the case will be closed upon the wrong shoulders before he has plucked his prize from the ashes." "The wrong shoulders, Miss Ashworth's and Miss Graves'? For Lestrade, they are most conveniently placed." Holmes' mouth twisted. "He has his chemist to swear to Miss Graves' purchase of belladonna, his solicitor to speak of a new will favoring Miss Ashworth, his obliging note pointing to a vague she. It is all as tidy as a juryman's supper. Unfortunately, the true pattern is rather less simple." "You still believe there is another hand," I said, "beyond doubt." He glanced out at the fog-shrouded lamps. "You will have noted, Watson, how Serapion strove in his velvet fashion to blacken Helena Graves. He presented her as intellectual accomplice, sharer of confidences, potential avenger. That may all be perfectly true, and yet it does not follow that she is a poisoner. I propose to learn, before Lestrade can clap irons upon her, precisely how far her knowledge extends." The cab drew up at last before the familiar red brick frontage. The constable on duty at the gate straightened as we approached. "Inspector Lestrade has not yet arrived?" Holmes asked curtly. "No, sir. Only myself," the man replied. "They said as how the inspector was detained at the yard for a bit." "Excellent. See that you admit no one, of whatever rank, until I give the word," Holmes said, with that air of quiet authority which even the police had learned, in time, to respect. Without waiting for assent, he mounted the steps and rang out. Mrs. Bramwell herself opened the door. Her eyes, already reddened by weeping, widened at sight of us. "Oh, Mr. Holmes, sir. You feared the worst, and you were not far wrong," Holmes cut in gently. "We have little time. Where are Miss Ashworth and Miss Graves?" "In the parlor, sir, together, the poor lamb's near beside herself." "And Miss Graves," she broke off. glancing anxiously toward the corridor. "Miss Graves is doing what she can to steady her," Holmes finished. "Good. Ask them to join us in the music room at once. And Mrs. Bramwell, on no account admit Inspector Lestrade until I have spoken with him. Tell him I am examining a new and delicate point of evidence, and that 10 minutes delay may save him a grave professional blunder." The old woman looked torn between terror of the law and trust in Holmes. "I'll do as you say, sir," she whispered at last. Holmes led the way upstairs with rapid strides. The music room, in the fading light, had taken on a yet more somber air. The grand piano loomed like a black sarcophagus. Thorne's empty chair behind the desk seemed to watch us with mute reproach. Cordelia and Helena entered moments later. The blind girl's face bore the drawn, strained look of one who has passed a day under accumulating dread. Helena Graves, by contrast, appeared cold and composed. But I, who had observed her before, detected a tension about the eyes and mouth that belied her outward calm. "Mr. Holmes," Cordelia said, her voice unsteady, have you learned?" "I have learned that you are in immediate danger," Holmes said, with abrupt frankness. "There is no time for gradual revelation. Inspector Lestrade has obtained certain facts that Miss Graves purchased belladonna tincture yesterday from a chemist nearby. That Mr. Thorne recently altered his will in your favor, and that a note was found in his hand containing the words, 'She knows why.' On the strength of this, he intends to arrest one or both of you tonight." Cordelia gasped. Her hand flew to her throat. Helena's lips thinned, but she did not exclaim. Instead, she said, very quietly, "So it has come to that." Holmes' gaze sharpened upon her. "You are not surprised, Miss Graves?" "I have been waiting for the knock at the door all day," she answered. "When a man dies unnaturally in a house inhabited only by women, the law seldom looks far afield for culprits. That I, in attempting to ease my friend's suffering, should have placed a weapon in foolish hands." She broke off abruptly. "In whose hands?" Holmes asked at once. "We must have precision, Miss Graves. You bought belladonna. For what purpose?" "For Cordelia," she said, with sudden heat. "She has bouts of violent neuralgia pains about the eyes, though there is no sight to strain. Her father's doctor abroad prescribed a preparation of belladonna as an antispasmodic. I have from him a written note, if you require it. Our own medical man has in the past supplied the tincture. Yesterday, his assistant was absent. He recommended a chemist in the high street. So I went. You may ask the pharmacist whether I described to him the dosage, the previous prescription, the nature of the complaint. It was all strictly regular. And the bottle?" Holmes said. "Where is it now?" "In my bag, locked," Helena replied. "Here." She produced a small reticule from beneath her cloak, opened it, and drew out a brown glass vial stoppered with cork and parchment. Holmes took it and held it up to the light, turning it slowly. He unstopped it, sniffed, and touched a minute quantity to his tongue. "A strong solution," he remarked. "Quite capable of killing in a sufficient dose. How much did you administer yesterday?" "None," Helena said. "We had some left from the previous bottle. I keep it in my own room. Cordelia does not handle medicines. When she complained of a headache in the evening, I considered giving her a dose. Instead, I tried rest and reading. I never opened the vial you now hold." "Yet you did open the old one?" Holmes' eyes were now very intent. "Yes, in the afternoon," she admitted. "One added a few drops to Cordelia's tea as I have done before. It did not ease her pain. That is all." Holmes inclined his head. "You understand, Miss Graves, that I must verify every point of your account. But I will say at once that it accords better with your established character than the role of cold-blooded murderess." Helena's composure cracked for the first time. "Do you think I could kill him?" she burst out. "Marcus, whom I admired, She checked herself violently, color flushing her cheeks. No, I despised him at times. I railed at his cowardice. But I did not wish him dead. I wished him better than he was. Holmes watched her keenly. You speak of cowardice. You refer to his conduct in Prague? Her eyes flashed to his. So you know of that? She said in a low voice. From whom? Crane, I suppose. Or from that snake Serapion? From both, Holmes said. And from your master's own conscience, which speaks in every line of that winter nocturne. When did you learn the truth of it? Bit by bit, she answered. At first, only hints, a name dropped, a place evaded. Then, some months ago, I came across a foreign journal among his papers, an old one, yellowed. There was an article, half cut out, about a scandal at the Prague Conservatoire. It spoke of a British violinist, initials MT, and a promising student whose work had been absorbed into his. The rest was gone, but not beyond reconstruction. You confronted him, Holmes said. Of course I did. Her chin lifted proudly. I asked him whether the story was true. He tried to laugh it off, then grew angry, then shamefaced. In the end, he admitted enough. He said he had been young, that the boy owed everything to his guidance, that collaboration was a gray area. Excuses. She made a contemptuous gesture. He swore that he had tried to make amends, had sent money, had offered, through intermediaries, to arrange employment. Perhaps he had. Men like Marcus will do anything but the one thing needful, publicly confess. And you? Holmes prompted. I told him that if he wished to build anything honest in his remaining years, he must at least cease to build upon that stolen foundation. He promised me he would never again perform the nocturne. I believed him. Her voice dropped. When Serapion's letter came, I knew at once what it meant. Marcus tried to hide it, but his agitation was too great. I pieced together enough from his mutterings. This man had been on the boy's side in Prague, apparently, from motives as mixed as any. Now he had found Marcus again, and he held the old scandal like a knife to his throat. You saw the crest, of course, Holmes said. The serpent and the lyre. Yes, on the ash that remained, she said. Holmes straightened. You admit, then, that you tampered with the great. I did more than tamper, Helena said steadily. I confess it freely. I removed and destroyed the ashes of Serapion's first letter. Cordelia gave a startled cry. Helena, you see, Doctor? Helena went on, turning to me with a sad little smile. I, too, have committed my small crime of evidence. Holmes leaned forward, every line of his body intent. Tell us precisely what you did, and when. In the late afternoon, she said. After Mrs. Bramwell had told me that Marcus had locked himself in, and after we heard that horrible playing, there was a lull. He came out to speak with me, to dictate the Vienna letter. He looked broken, in a way I had never seen. When he returned here, he left the door ajar for a moment. I went in shortly afterward. The smell of burnt paper still hung in the air. There were fragments of charred sheet in the grate, some with writing yet visible. I saw enough of phrase here, a name there, to grasp that Serapion was threatening not only exposure, but also to involve Cordelia by name. Your blind protégé will not be spared knowledge, he wrote. That was too much. She drew a breath. I took the tongs, gathered the ashes, and carried them to the kitchen range. I fed them into the hottest part of the fire until they were utterly consumed. I did not tell Marcus. I thought, foolishly, that if there were no trace of the letter, the danger might somehow be less real. So when Mrs. Bramwell brought the 10 o'clock tea, Holmes said, half to himself, the ashes she saw in this grate were not Serapion's at all, but some remnants of previous fires. Yes, Helena said. I dare say. She is not in the habit of scrutinizing cinders. Holmes's earlier infants dissolved silently before this straightforward account, and the phantom ashes I looked for this morning had never existed. He murmured, A chastening lesson, Watson. Absence of evidence is not always evidence of absence. Sometimes it is evidence of a woman's misguided loyalty. He turned back to Helena. One more point. Miss Ashworth heard a violin in the dead of night, a constrained, muted tone. Who played? Helena hesitated fractionally. I did, she said at last. For a few minutes only. Cordelia turned toward her in astonishment. Helena! You never told me. Because it could only distress you, Helena said, with a brief, apologetic glance. I could not sleep. After you dropped off, my mind would not be still. I kept seeing that letter, imagining that vile man's face. I knew Marcus had hidden the Nocturne manuscript somewhere. If Serapion were to gain it, he would have all the more power. So I crept along here, meaning to search. You can play then, Holmes interjected quietly. Enough for my own ear, she said. I am no virtuoso. I found your violin. Cordelia, she touched the case upon the side table, and I put on the mute so as not to wake the house. I thought, absurdly, that if I played the opening bars, it might stir some association in me that would suggest where Marcus had concealed the score. We had discussed its structure often enough. And did it? Holmes asked. She shook her head. I found nothing, either in my mind or in this room. I left everything as it was and crept back. I had no notion that Cordelia had half-wakened and heard my foolish experiment. Cordelia reached blindly for her friend's hand. Why did you not wake me? She whispered. We could have searched together. Because I would not drag you deeper into that mire, Helena said fiercely. You have lived your life in darkness, Cordelia. I would at least spare you some shadows. Holmes was silent for a few moments. The explanation fitted so precisely with the stray strands he had collected that I could see his earlier picture of the night's events reassembling itself before his inner eye. Very well, he said at length. We have accounted, then, for the missing ashes and the nocturnal music. We have an innocent, if imprudent, reason for the belladonna purchase. What remains is the poison in Thorne's cup and the note in his hand. He turned those clear gray eyes full upon Helena. Miss Graves, look into your own mind with that same rigor you bring to a manuscript. Can you swear to me, by all you hold sacred, that you did not, at any moment yesterday, add an excessive dose of belladonna to Marcus Thorne's tea or to anything else he consumed? She met his gaze without flinching. I swear it, she said simply. I did not poison him. And you, Miss Ashworth, Holmes said, softening his tone as he faced the blind girl. Did you, in any way, handle his food, drink, or medicines yesterday after supper? Never, Cordelia said, her voice trembling. I did not even go near this room after the lesson. I swear it, Mr. Holmes. I am no saint, but I am no murderer. Holmes drew a breath as if some inward tension eased. I believe you both, he said. Unfortunately, Inspector Lestrade will not. As if in answer to his words, there came the heavy clang of the front door below, followed by the unmistakable tread of official boots upon the tiles and the rise of Lestrade's sharp voice in the hall. Holmes' head snapped toward the door. We are out of time, he said rapidly. Listen to me, both of you. Say nothing beyond the barest facts until I have spoken. You are to submit to whatever questioning Lestrade chooses to inflict, but you will not answer any inquiry touching upon Prague, Serapion, or the Nocturne. Refer him to me. Helena's eyes narrowed. You mean to use us as pieces in some game of your own, Mr. Holmes? I mean to keep you alive long enough to see the true player unmasked, he returned, no less fiercely. If you thwart me by indulging your pride or your sense of sacrifice, you may drag Cordelia with you to the gallows. Cordelia's hand tightened convulsively on Helena's. We will do as you say, she whispered. Holmes nodded once. Watson, stand ready. We are about to witness Lestrade's grand entry. With luck and a little skill, we may yet turn his bludgeon into a scalpel. The door opened with a brusque movement, and Lestrade stepped in, 2 constables at his back. His small, sharp eyes swept the room, alighting at once upon the 2 women, and then upon Holmes. "So you have forestalled me, Holmes," he said. "All the better. You can be present when I execute my duty. Cordelia Ashworth, Helena Graves, I am arresting you on suspicion of the willful murder of Marcus Thorne by means of poison." "One moment." "Inspector," Holmes cut in, stepping forward with a sudden commanding air I had seen him use only at the most critical junctures. "Before you proceed, you will listen to what I have to say. For if you put those words on record without first hearing me, you may find that the noose you prepare will close upon the wrong neck, and that another, more dangerous man will walk free." Lestrade opened his mouth to retort. Then, perhaps moved by some instinct that this was no ordinary protest, he shut it again. "You have 5 minutes, Holmes," he said grudgingly. "No more." "5 minutes will suffice," Holmes replied. "For in that time, Inspector, I shall lay before you a plan that will not only preserve your case if you are right, but also if you are wrong. Deliver into your hands the true murderer of Marcus Thorne." Holmes did not wait for Lestrade to qualify his grudging concession. "You intend," he said, "to remove these ladies in irons and to present to a magistrate your chemist, your solicitor, your belladonna bottle, and your obliging note. It is a stout case for a man who sees only the inside of the house. And where else should I look?" Lestrade demanded. The windows were fastened. The door was open to them, and no one else. He died of poison in his own tea. Who but those under this roof could have given it? Who, indeed? Holmes returned. "And yet there are 3 little things which sit ill with your theory, Inspector. I shall mention them quickly, for time presses. First, there were 2 cups upon the tray to which you were so ready to attribute murder. One you have reasonably connected with the deceased. But the second, though found empty and apparently unused, bore a distinct ring of tea at its base. Someone poured and removed the contents. Who? For if Miss Ashworth was in her bed and Miss Graves in hers, and Mrs. Bramwell in the kitchen, then your poisoner must have had the freedom of this room at 10 o'clock without belonging to the household at all. Second, upon the dead man's left lapel, there clung a fiber of gray wool of a texture foreign to his own clothing. Upon his left wrist there was a small but definite bruise, such as might be caused by a stranger's grasp. Taken with the second cup, it suggests not solitary death, but an interview with tea for 2. Third, on the floor by this desk, and under the nail of Thorne's thumb, I found fragments of crimson sealing wax bearing traces of a particular device. That device we have since seen in full upon this ring." He drew from his pocket the folded scrap containing the wax, opened it, and held it beside the serpent lyre which glittered upon Lestrade's own finger as he turned to look. "These fragments did not fall here from a letter written a day before and opened elsewhere," Holmes went on. "They are fresh. They tell us that, in this very room, and within a few hours of his death, Marcus Thorne dealt with wax and seal belonging, not to himself, but to a certain foreign gentleman who calls himself Serapion. That same gentleman admits to having visited Thorne 2 days ago on business nearly amounting to blackmail. He expected Thorne here tonight at 10. Thorne is dead instead, at about the hour he should have left the house. You will arrest 2 women and let that man sleep at his hotel?" Lestrade's jaw worked. He cast an involuntary glance at the fragment of wax, then at Helena and Cordelia. The former had gone very white. The latter clutched at the back of a chair, her blind eyes wide and fixed. "You have seen this Serapion?" he asked. "Within the last hour. He came to Baker Street, uninvited. I smelt upon him the same peculiar perfume that clung, faint but unmistakable, to the paper of the note you found in Thorne's hand. I compared his letter to Thorne with that very note, and though the handwriting was cleverly imitated, the paper bore the same continental watermark. Add to this a convenient alibi resting wholly on his word and that of a hall porter he can buy, and you have all the elements of a more subtle case than the one you have made. Lestrade frowned heavily. Even if I grant you that the fellow's hands aren't clean, he said, it doesn't follow that these ladies are. I can't ignore my evidence, Holmes. I do not ask you to ignore it, Holmes replied. I ask you to use it. You have here a threatened arrest, a bottle of poison, and a house still rich in hiding places. With these and a little play acting, we may draw our fish to the surface. Let Serapion believe that the manuscript he covets is about to be discovered and that his most convenient scapegoats are about to be taken away. He will move, Inspector. Men of his stamp cannot endure to see their game spoiled. Lestrade hesitated. The two constables shifted uncertainly. What precisely do you propose? That you postpone the arrests for 3 hours and lend me your name, Holmes said swiftly. Miss Graves will write, at my dictation, a short note to Serapion, as if in her own panic. She will say that the police have found something behind the wainscot. We will leave it vague and that you, Inspector Lestrade, in your obtuseness, attach no importance to it. She will add that she dares not leave the house, but that if you will slip in by the garden door at 10:30, she can put it into his hands before you return with a warrant. Lestrade stared. You want me to help you lure this man into a house I am supposed to be guarding? It's irregular, Holmes. Very irregular. It is also your only chance to exchange a conjectural case against 2 women for a solid case against the man whose seal, scent, and schedule all point to his presence at the scene of the crime. Holmes shot back. Refuse, and you may find when you have done hanging these 2 that Serapion has quietly taken ship for the continent with Thorne's stolen music and a fresh set of victims in view. The little inspector gnawed his mustache. I could see the struggle in him between caution and ambition. At last he said, grudgingly, very well. I won't say you haven't pulled us out of a hole before. But understand this, Holmes. If your plan comes to nothing, I will come back here and execute my duty to the letter. I won't have it said I let murderesses slip for the sake of your theories. It shall not be said, Holmes answered calmly. Now, Miss Graves, if you please. We must have that note on its way within the quarter hour. It would be tedious were I to dwell upon every detail of the hours that followed. Helena Graves, pale but steady-handed, wrote as Holmes dictated, her pen tracing words which, I do not doubt, must have been bitter to set down even in simulation. Lestrade dispatched a man post-haste with the letter to Serapion's hotel, with orders to watch whether any answer or movement followed. Mrs. Bramwell, under strict injunctions, admitted no one and kept the household to quiet routine, so as not to excite suspicion in any eyes that might be watching from without. By 10 o'clock. The music room had been transformed into a stage set for the final act. The gas was turned low. The curtains at the window were drawn back a little, leaving a wedge of darkness between their folds, a convenient hiding place in which Lestrade and 1 constable secreted themselves, revolvers ready. Holmes and I took up positions behind the heavy drapery at the inner door, from which we could command both the desk and the entrance from the landing. Miss Ashworth and Miss Graves were sent to their rooms, with Cordelia solemnly promising to remain there, whatever sounds she might hear. It goes against the grain to have you risk yourself thus. Holmes, I whispered as we waited in the gloom. My dear Watson, I have been in tighter corners than a Hampstead drawing-room with Lestrade at my elbow, he murmured back. Hush, footsteps. Somewhere below, a key turned very softly in a lock. A board creaked. The faintest murmur of voices, Mrs. Bramwell's, and another, lower and smoother, floated up the stair. Then came the sound of the music-room door opening, and a figure slipped inside. In the half-light I recognized at once the tall, spare outline and the pale glint of the serpent ring. Serapion closed the door gently behind him and stood for a moment, listening. Satisfied, apparently, that he was alone. He moved toward the desk with the assured air of a man who has trodden that path before. He carried a small dark lantern, which he now shielded with one hand as he directed its beam along the edge of the skirting board, then up toward the paneling above the fireplace, as if seeking some remembered mark. "So," came Holmes' voice from the doorway, sudden and sharp as a violin's first attack. "You look for something, Mr. Serapion? Perhaps the music that dies with your victim." Serapion wheeled, the lantern swinging wildly. For an instant his hand darted toward his breast. Then he thought better of it, for Lestrade had stepped from the curtains with pistol leveled. "I should not advise it," the inspector said grimly. "There are 3 of us, and you are not upon the continent now." For the first time, I saw Serapion's composure falter. His pale eyes flicked from one to another of us, measuring chances. Then he straightened and allowed the lantern to dangle at his side. "A neat little drama," he said, though his voice had lost something of its earlier languor. "You play your parts well. I take it Miss Graves has been indiscreet." "Miss Graves has been frank," Holmes corrected. "Unlike yourself." "You received her appeal?" "I received a note bearing her hand, certainly," he said, the ghost of a smile returning. "Conveyed most appropriately by a messenger of the law. I suspected a trap, of course. Yet I came." "Your greed outweighed your caution," Holmes observed. "You could not be sure whether the manuscript was here or not, nor whether, in the confusion of an arrest, it might be destroyed." "Possibly," Serapion allowed. "Or possibly I came because I have a certain regard for Miss Ashworth, and did not wish to see her ruined for a deed she did not commit." "Your regard is touching," Holmes said dryly. "But you will have ample leisure to compose elegies upon it in prison." "Lestrade, be so good." The inspector stepped forward and snapped the bracelets upon Serapion's wrists with a practiced movement. "I arrest you," he said, "on suspicion of the murder of Marcus Thorne, and of attempting to extort property by threats. Anything you say may be used." Serapion laughed suddenly, a hard, unpleasant sound. "You English," he said. "You cling to your formulas like drowning men. Do you imagine that a scrap of wax and a cup ring will hang me?" "No," Holmes said quietly. "But your own mouth may, when you try to explain away certain items that will be found in your room and upon your person. For instance, the draft of the very note which lay in Thorne's hand, the second vial of belladonna whose maker will identify you, and the letter from Vienna which you stole from his hall table to bolster your threats." Serapion's lips thinned. "You have been busy," he said. "And you, my dear sir, have been complacent," Holmes returned. "You will find that a more dangerous fault." Lestrade, to his credit, lost no time. Within the hour he had Serapion conveyed to the yard and a search party dispatched to the Strand Hotel. It was not until late the following afternoon that Holmes and I once more found ourselves by our own fireside. Lestrade opposite us with a sheaf of papers, and the pale gleam of real satisfaction in his eye. "You were right, Holmes," he said without preamble, dropping into the chair by the hearth. "Right as rain, curse you. We found just what you said we'd find." The hotel manager and the hall porter began to hedge the minute they saw my warrant. Turned out Serapion had slipped out by a private door soon after 9 on the night of the murder, leaving his critic friend comfortably drunk in the lounge. Came back after 11 through the same side entrance. Our critic swore he had been with him the whole evening. A fiver explains many lapses of memory. "And the other matters?" Holmes asked. Lestrade riffled his papers. In his room we recovered an unfinished letter in Thorne's hand, addressed to Serapion, dated that very evening, giving in to the man's demands as to the nocturne, but stipulating certain conditions. On the same table lay a second sheet begun in the same hand but in another style. "The music dies with me. She knows why. It broke off there. We found beside it a pen bearing Thorne's ink and a penknife with traces of pencil lead upon the blade. Looks as if our gentleman traced letters for the dying man to follow. The paper matches that of the note in the study exactly. Watermark and all. As for the belladonna, there was a small phial in his traveling case, bought from a chemist in Vienna whose label still clung to it. Our own Dr. Kelsey says the residue in it is the same strength and kind as the poison in Thorne's stomach, and not quite the same as that in Miss Graves' tincture. He also confirms what you said, that a man in the first throes of such poisoning would be in no fit state to compose witticisms about music dying. And the Vienna letter? Holmes said. Lestrade smiled. In a locked drawer, sure enough. The refusal Graves copied by dictation, with Thorne's signature. He never posted it. Serapion took it from the hall table and kept it as an extra lever. We have his own admission on that point. He calls it business. Holmes' eyes gleamed. Then the case is complete. Near enough for the Old Bailey, Lestrade said with grim satisfaction. He hasn't confessed to the actual poisoning, of course. Says he merely helped a man hasten an inevitable end, but the jury won't swallow that. We've got him on blackmail whatever happens. And with your evidence and mine together, I fancy we'll have him on the rope as well. When Lestrade had gone, leaving behind him a trail of cigar ash and a rare compliment to Holmes' interference, I could not refrain from pressing my friend for the full chain of his reasoning. You suspected Serapion from the moment you saw his seal, I said. Yet you allowed him to come and go, to speak ill of Helena Graves, almost unchecked. Holmes smiled faintly. My dear Watson, to pounce too soon is to lose one's prey. Until I had seen him, smelt his perfume, and tested his nerve, I lacked both motive and method. His visit to Baker Street was an error born of vanity. A simpler man would have fled. A subtler one would have disappeared into the fog. Serapion chose to come and plead his case. In doing so, he confirmed his presence in the affair and, more importantly, betrayed his fear that it might be closed prematurely. That fear was the key to our trap. And the physical clues, the wax, the fiber, the cups? They formed a skeleton, he said. The wax told me that his private seal had been brought into this room at a time when, by his account, he had no reason to approach the house. The gray fiber and the wrist bruise showed me that Thorne had not drunk his last tea alone. The second cup ring, which had entirely escaped Lestrade, revealed that his guest had shared refreshment. Kelsey's estimate of the time of death, coupled with the stopped watch, placed that visit between 10 and 11:30 precisely the window when Serapion slipped out of his hotel by the back stairs. The note, with its ambiguous she and its cool cynicism, bore no resemblance to the scrawled appeal of a man in agonies of atropine. But it echoed, in tone, the polished malice of Serapion's own letter. That was why the smell upon it struck me, the faint trace of his foreign scent, clinging where he had perhaps handled it too much in his staging. You saw then, I said, that he had come here, drugged the tea, forced Thorne, in extremis, to grant him certain rights, and then, not content with that, cobbled together a postscript that would both satisfy his sadistic humor and point suspicion toward any convenient woman in the house. Just so, Holmes nodded. He is, at heart, a dramatist, as many blackmailers are. The phrase, "the music dies with me," flatters Thorne's vanity. She knows why as a poisoned gift to the law. Any she, Cordelia, Helena, even Mrs. Bramwell might be made to fit. Serapion cares nothing which. He needed only a feminine pronoun to set the hounds baying in the wrong direction. And poor Helena's destruction of the ashes? I mused. A foolish act, but an understandable one, Holmes said. She thought to shield her friend from knowledge. In doing so, she removed the only direct evidence of Serapion's written threats, though. Happily, he had been too arrogant to destroy all of his drafts. It misled me for an hour or two, but her candor and confession outweighed the inconvenience. And Elliot Crane? Holmes shrugged. Crane is an injured man, not a criminal one. His bitterness is turned inward more than outward. I suspect that, in the end, he may benefit most from this sorry business. With Serapion in the dock and Thorne dead, there will be little appetite among musical men to see the Winter Nocturne continue under the wrong name. Already certain critics whisper of earlier drafts and student collaboration. Helena Graves, with her sharp pen, will see to it that the story takes the right turn. I fancy your friend Langdale Pike may help. He reached for his pipe, then paused, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly. As for Miss Ashworth, he went on, Thorne's will stands. She will have enough to live with modest independence, to play when and where she chooses, and perhaps, to commission some honest music of her own. Her blindness has spared her some sights, but not all sorrows. You speak as if you pitied Thorne himself. I said. Holmes' expression grew more austere. I reserve my deepest contempt. As you know, for blackmailers, he said. Thorne stole in the open field. Serapion struck from the shadows. Yet Thorne's sin, though less sordid, was not light. He took what was not his by right and let another man bear the ruin. The manner of his death was cruel, but he laid kindling for that fire long ago. If some measure of justice is done now in putting his affairs to rights, it will be rough justice indeed. I reserve my deepest contempt, as you know, for blackmailers, he said. Thorne stole in the open field. Serapion struck from the shadows. Yet Thorne's sin, though less sordid, was not light. He took what was not his by right and let another man bear the ruin. The manner of his death was cruel, but he laid kindling for that fire long ago. If some measure of justice is done now in putting his affairs to rights, it will be rough justice indeed. He fell silent, drawing thoughtfully upon his pipe. The familiar blue smoke began to spiral toward the ceiling, curling and dispersing like the last echoes of some distant melody. In the end, I ventured. The music did not die with him. Holmes smiled faintly. Art rarely does, Watson. It slips the leash of those who abuse it. In this case, it passes from a man who misused his genius to those who, with less brilliance but more honesty, may perhaps treat it better. That, at least, is a coda even I can approve. He rose, went to the mantel-shelf, and took down his violin. For a moment he stood with it cradled under his chin, his bow poised above the strings. Shall it be Paganini? I asked. He shook his head. No, I have had enough of virtuoso's tricks for one day. Something simpler batch, perhaps. He had his demons, no doubt, but he did not steal another man's soul to appease them. And as the grave, pure notes of a partita began to fill the room, washing away the last ghosts of Serapion's poisoned game, I could not but reflect once more upon the strange, intricate webs of motive and guilt which my friend so coolly unraveled. The public, reading in due course a bald summary of the Hampstead violinist poisoning case, would never know how nearly an innocent blind girl and her devoted companion had fallen under the shadow of the gallows, nor how a fragment of wax and a ghostly strain of music in the night had saved them. But I knew, and Sherlock Holmes knew, and that, as always, was enough.